Over the last couple of videos, we've talked about healthy small groups and said that there were some facets, 5 facets. And today we're going to talk about one of the critical junctures in the life of a small group, where it moves from simply being a group who's together to being a group who thinks of themselves as a group and are moving together forward. Because we've talked about small groups forming out of affinity, the common ground that we share, and we've talked about people just being consistent, both in their showing up and also in their engagement. But the third facet of a healthy small group is transparency. It's the moment where the small group starts to open up to one another. They start being more open and saying, here's who I am, and here's what my strengths are, and here's what my weaknesses are. And there's some level of transparency when we start talking about our strengths, but often that's what we feel the most comfortable talking about. You will know you are starting to achieve a level of transparency and openness and authenticity when people start talking about their weaknesses, what they struggle with, or even what they disagree with. That level of transparency only comes with trust. It comes with trust because trust is essentially helping people grow into the moment where they can be transparent. And here's what I've often seen in the small groups that I've been a part of and the small groups that I've led, is it almost feels like trust and transparency just one day, boom, and it happened. But that's not actually what happened. See, trust would be more like a plant or a flower that's growing up out of the ground, and you see the buds and you know that there's stuff happening under the ground, and it takes a little while to get there, and then it grows up out of it. And then one day you walk outside and the flower's open. And it feels like it happened overnight, but it didn't, did it? It actually took a long time to develop that trust, to be transparent with one another. And that transparency is one of the most valuable things in a small group for humans. We need spaces where we can share openly, authentically, honestly. And I'm not even just talking about spaces that are, say, a support group. I'm in the support small group and we can share openly and honestly about what I'm talking about. Work groups. I'm talking about students working on projects, because until you get to the transparency level, people won't be able to say, this project is not going the way I want it to and I need help. Or we're working on this particular paper or this particular thing in school, and I don't understand it. Until people are capable of actually being transparent with your group, you're going to just keep having a certain level of trust, but never crossing over this threshold into real flourishing and growth. But there are 2 dangers that come along, frankly, with transparency. 2 dangers I've seen in small groups that happen in ways that people didn't anticipate. The first danger in transparency is that we think that we've achieved transparency with one another, and so we've now almost like leveled up in a video game. And once you level up in a video game, you can't usually go back down. One of the dangers about transparency is that it is tied to trust. And so when people in a small group ignore when people are being transparent, or share inappropriately outside the group, or with one another in ways that are inappropriate, that level of trust goes down. And with it goes the transparency. So the first danger is that with transparency, we think we've gotten to this grandiose level of being a great small group. Look at us, we're transparent with one another, and it's going to be like that forever. It's not necessarily the case. Because if something like that happens to diminish the trust, the transparency will shrink. The second danger that I've seen in small groups is that people think that every person in the small group is prepared or trusting at about the same levels, as though they all grow in the same way. And that's not true either. There are some people who will develop trust and transparency because they have greater affinity with someone and they've been more consistently in relationship with that person. Their trust and transparency may go up quicker than somebody else who's just coming to the group. There may be somebody who was hurt in a previous relationship, and that's diminished their capacity to trust, which diminishes their capacity for transparency. The second danger is that you assume that every single person in your group is ready to be as transparent as every other person in your group, and that's not true either. And by doing so, you actually diminish the trust in the group because you start pushing the people. Why aren't you being transparent? They are. Everybody is on their own journey and they're still working through things. Just because one or two or even three people are ready to be this transparent, be careful that in your attempts to have people open up and engage, you do not push them so hard that they disengage and pull away. Because for whatever reason, if trust begins to diminish, so will transparency. They are directly related. The level of trust and the level of transparency in a small group are so correlated that when one goes down, the other goes down, and when one goes up, the other goes up. You can't have transparency in a small group without trust.